Hey guys, thanks for checking in. As always, I'm Reed Coverdale, and you're watching The Naturalist Capitalist, and I've got Dack back on the show again. How's it going, Dack?
I don't know what it's going to take for people to kick me off of YouTube. You know, all anybody wants to do is hear me spew venom, bile, or fight with people. No matter what I do, they just keep bringing me back. It's I don't know what it is, but no, good to be back.
Yeah, good to have you. So, I think you and I are of the same mindset that we are anti-authoritarian, that we fear the state more than anything the state is going to be trying to put down, because the state has a monopoly on violence, and they also have immunity, and they are backed by the law. So if you fight the state, I mean, you're kind of screwed. Whereas if, you know, it's these protest, if it's the rioters or any other faction you want to name, they don't have the same immunity against you. But first, I wanted to hear what you thought about the Republican National Convention, because last time we had you on, you talked about the Democratic one. So what did you watch the whole Republican one, and what did you think?
Well, I tuned in every night. Admittedly, I did not watch as much of it as I did the Democrat convention, just because this is my view, and I'll get you. I'll see if you feel the same way I do about the Republican Party versus the Democrat Party. I feel like a novice would look at the work that we do, and they would assume that we're hardcore Republicans because of how much time we spend attacking the Democrats. But the reason we do that is because, in my opinion, the Democrats are much better with their propaganda. They're much better at masking their hypocrisy and their corruption. If you actually think that the Republican Party is a force for good, then I just don't know what to do for you. Like, you are so deeply plugged into the matrix. It's like this. I think I said this recently on Big Talk, Little Talk. Kindergarten teachers play a very important role in our society, but it's not a role that I understand how to play. And that's why I don't bother explaining much of what's wrong with the Republican Party. I just can't bring myself down to that level. I mean, is that kind of where you are, where it just seems like kind of political propaganda 101?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I criticize the Democrats more, because I feel like more intellectual people are somehow tricked into thinking that they're so much better than the Republicans, when that's so divorced from reality. Something you also said on Big Talk, Little Talk when I was on about a month ago was that the Democrats are like tease and deny, where the Republicans are just like blatant sodomization, I think is the word you used. They're just like, yeah,
well,
I mean.
Well, that's what makes Trump such an uncomfortable presence for so many people, is that typically with any politician, even a Republican, you have to do at least a little bit of research to understand what's wrong with them. With Trump, it's so obvious and so brazen and so clear that the fact that 60+ million people actually got suckered into it, it should make you uncomfortable, because it's not a very flattering assessment of where we are as an intellectual society. So the Republican National Convention, which was basically just a 4-night orgiastic sacrifice to the honor of Trump. I mean, I think it was The Nation recently wrote about how the Republican Party did not draft a platform for the convention. There is no platform going into the election. It's just whatever Trump says goes. That is the foundation of a cult. So you had a lot of these clowns and a lot of average Joes who were shuttled out to Washington, D.C. to speak about how America has been made great again. And, you know, like I said, if you actually think there is the slightest bit of authenticity to any of this, I really just don't know what to do for you. So did I watch it? I mean, I definitely was less sober for the Republican convention than I was for the Democrat one, but as far as how seriously I took it, not at all. I just remember Mike Pence in that red tie and the button up with no suit jacket at the farm talking to the little kid, and I just was, yeah, the parallels to Jeffrey Epstein were too much. I had to stop that.
Yeah, I mean, I was raised in a very Christian conservative household, and seeing Franklin Graham speaking at Trump's convention, that just sent shivers through my spine. And then the other thing is, I have in the past been a fan of Rand Paul, and then seeing him glorify Trump on the stage and say that, Trump represents the values that he does. Those two instances were the most the most chilling to me, because the rest of it was honestly kind of entertaining to watch because it was just so ridiculous. But those two guys, sheep herding people of their values into supporting Trump, that was what really struck me as really kind of sinister, I guess, or it made me very uncomfortable.
I wish Rand Paul wasn't so widely reviled, because you should hold him up as an example for the Bernie supporters and the Tulsi supporters who want to talk about how you got to play the long game. You got to play by the party's rules in order to get what you want. Right. I would point to Rand Paul and be like, Tulsi supporters and Bernie supporters, this could be you. Do not think that you're playing a game of multi-dimensional chess. Like, it will not end well for you. You will just be prostituting yourself to some corrupt oligarch. And Rand Paul, I said this on Big Talk, Little Talk, it tried to convince me you would give a flip about that guy if his name was Rand Smith. It's only because he's been sponging off of his dad's legacy. It's nepotism defined. He has not earned the amount of patience that any of us have given him. Like, I am done with Rand Paul. I do not ever want to hear from anybody who's like, I think Rand Paul's a good guy. It's like there was a shark in that convention. He jumped way over it. No, Rand Paul is finished.
What's weird with Rand is he chooses strange hills to die on. So, for instance, that anti-lynching bill, he was correct that the anti-lynching bill was bullshit and that it only, extended severe punishments to non-violent crimes. That's all that bill did. And so he was correct to be against it, but he blocks that, and then he votes for Mike Pompeo. He votes for Jeff Sessions. It's just like, what are you doing? Like, why are you dying on that hill instead of this one? That's kind of how I feel about him right now. So.
Well, people brought up how he was mobbed by protesters after he went to the convention, yet he had drafted legislation that would have ended the practice that resulted in Breonna Taylor's murder. And I get that. And also his I believe he had objected to the CARES Act, if I recall correctly. Yes. And he got a lot of flack on Twitter for that. I didn't really vocally defend him, but again, I understand where he was coming from. But like you say, if you're going to be taking those principled stances, then it is very strange for you to die on the hill of Donald Trump. And I mean, I really just, to go back to what I said a moment ago, I really do believe he has been given so much of the benefit of the doubt that he has not earned just because he has his dad's last name. A lot of people think that he's going to be Ron Paul Part 2, and he has failed to deliver on that every step of the way. I'm not going to say he's wrong about everything. Like, obviously, if you had to choose between him and Mitch McConnell, it's like the difference between stage 2 and stage 4 cancer. So you'd obviously but it's like this idea that somehow he's good, like, that's where I just don't get it. It's like, yeah, he's diet Mitch McConnell, but that doesn't make him, the elixir of life. I'm so sick of he gets this attention just because of his father. It's inappropriate.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to phase into, we just talked about the Republicans and how terrible they are, but I don't really see a difference in authoritarianism whether we end up with the Republicans or the Democrats. Specifically, when we're talking about the riots. I've seen a lot of people, saying that Biden is a closet communist who sympathizes with these protesters and that he wants to, have them overtake our political system. Just like all these ridiculous statements. In my opinion, Biden is speaking softly about the riots and the protests because he knows that there is a potential voting bloc for him there that he doesn't want to alienate. But the second he becomes president, if those riots do not calm down and go away, he will use every bit of force that Trump would, and the media will act as if nothing is happening, just like they did with Obama. I mean, what's your take? Do you agree? Or
yeah, the thing is, I know I'm gonna piss some people off when I say this. These protests and these uprisings that we're seeing right now are clearly orchestrated by very powerful people. I attended the Black Lives Matter rally in Boston just a few days after George Floyd's murder. And the level of sophistication, coordination, and organization there was absolutely no way that was just some spontaneous, organic uprising of disenfranchised, disorderly youth. That was structured by political professionals. Then any optimism you may have had that it was organic, that was squashed just about a week or so later. I attended the Manchester, New Hampshire Black Lives Matter rally, and you saw several people there wearing Joe Biden paraphernalia. The Biden, I'm not suggesting that the Democratic Party is orchestrating these protests specifically, but very clearly the Biden campaign is seeking to capitalize on them. Now, like you just said, during the Obama years, there was a lot of media censorship of some of the unrest that was taking place in a lot of these cities, particularly in Ferguson after the death of, I think it was Michael Brown who the policeman killed down there. Anyway, in Ferguson, the chaos that was brewing down there was really toned down in the media, which Donald Trump may have been able to exploit when he ran for president 2 years later. I think that what the Biden campaign is trying to suggest to the bourgeoisie is that if he is elected, these protests will die down of their own accord. But if not, you can rest assured that he will send in the federal stormtroopers to shut them down himself. It's just that the media will be blocking for him. And even if he is not cognitively engaged, you can bet that Kamala Harris will be doing the dirty work for him. I'm reading right now a book published in 1961 by the Algerian Marxist revolutionist Frantz Fanon, and he talks about how the colonialist regimes will not attempt to go toe-to-toe with revolutionary forces for a sustained period of time because they don't have the firepower to suppress the violence and the unrest. The American empire is far more sophisticated now than it was in the early 1960s. And so if we view ourselves, we the victims of this neo-capitalist system of tyranny, as the colonized, we can rest assured that the colonialists have all of the firepower they need to take us down.
Right. So you and I definitely go after the state a lot more than we do any agitators of the state. Yes. And that's because, as I mentioned earlier, they have a monopoly on violence. They're immune. They can get away with anything. Yeah. So I think a lot of people, somehow think that I sympathize with rioting and destruction of small businesses. That is not the case for me. I mean, there's been some videos of, protesters or whatever you want to call them, jumping on tractor trailers and trying to get into the cab. And I'm a truck driver myself. If there were a protest in the street and I stopped and they jumped on my truck, I would take off in self-defense. And if there was someone coming into my neighborhood trying to attack my neighbors or trying to attack my house or attack me, I would shoot them. That is how I feel about this. So I wanted to hear your take on the rioters and the destruction. What do you think?
Well, this is what I'm saying, that I'm sure that this is being orchestrated by powerful people, is that they want Americans, not all Americans, but they want a significant percentage of the population to be afraid of what's happening out in some of these cities.
Right.
It's not going to happen in a place like New Hampshire. But what we're seeing happen out there, yes, you're absolutely right, that if somebody is coming into your home, particularly when you have done nothing wrong, then obviously you have every right to defend yourself. Now, I'm not going to comment on this kid Rittenhouse, who may or may not have been an agitator, or who may or may not have just been an idiot who thought he was defending his community when he drove 5 hours away. It doesn't matter. But the thing is, what I believe they're attempting to do in this situation is they are training the law enforcement agencies, quote unquote, whether it's the federal stormtroopers or whether it's the military or local police or what have you. They're training them for the future disassembling of the United States. If you think that the people are getting outraged because of a shooting in Wisconsin or because of a murder in Minneapolis, the upcoming eviction of, what are they talking about now, 50 million people, something like that, are potentially facing eviction, on top of the 50 million unemployed. That is when political ideology falls away in the face of the fact that you can't fill your refrigerator. And that's when people start getting violent. And so I believe that this is largely a dry run for the suppression of more impassioned, animalistic unrest that's going to be coming down the pike. I do believe that as the evictions begin to pile up in numbers, and as the homeless population continues to surge, which I've seen a surge of already here in New Hampshire, as that becomes a problem, the police are going to have increasing pressure to try to control the situation. I do believe that this is a dry run, and perhaps there's a racist element involved in that. Maybe they think that if they shoot some unarmed black people along the way, they're just collateral damage. I can't speak to that specifically, but nothing's out of the question in this situation. The American empire is not in particularly good health.
So before all this stuff started happening, when I would talk hypotheticals with my friends or family about a totalitarian state that would completely just take over every facet of our lives, what they would need is a crisis to blame their authoritarianism on, and a crisis that was serious enough that the people would openly welcome authoritarianism over danger. And that is literally exactly what we're seeing, with the disease, with the riots, with the unrest. You are eventually going to see everybody, except for people who don't operate out of fear, be begging for the government to come in and introduce stability and, crush the unrest, and that is kind of terrifying because, as I said, I'm way more scared of the long-term freedoms we're going to lose, but people only look at the immediate future and the immediate discomfort, and they will give everything away for that. Is that what you see? Is it kind of inevitable? That's just what's going to happen?
Well, yes, I wrote about this in a previous article at overwritten.org. The situation we have now, in many ways, the sentiment is similar to what people were feeling in Austria and Hungary prior to World War I, where, according to Hitler, they didn't want a peaceful solution. They just wanted to blow each other's heads off because they hated each other that much. Here in the United States, it's very difficult to imagine a presidential candidate who would be able to conciliate the two factions because of the extreme polarization, the irrational polarization. So with both sides literally calling for each other's blood, the blood of their opponents, what we have is a field of extreme polarization which is ripe for an autocrat to invade and to claim and to exploit and to say, I will vanquish your enemies. The trick is finding a common enemy that the neoliberal extremists and the neoconservative extremists can direct their mutual ire against. I'm not sure who that enemy would be. It could be Russia, it could be China, it could be some other entity. But the point is, trying to rope these two people together and trying to get them under a single tent is not nearly as complicated as you would think. And so the possibility for an authoritarian to just swoop in and take control of this, people like to compare Trump to Hitler. I think Trump is in many ways, he could be the precursor to Hitler. It could be that Trump is laying the groundwork for an extreme autocrat like that to really take control. What that autocrat would be specifically, I don't know. I mean, it would have been very difficult 6 years ago to predict Donald Trump as he is today. So I don't really try to pretend that I have the answers. But yes, this country is so vulnerable to the appeal of a fascist unilateral ideology. I mean, and every day it gets worse and worse, particularly as we come into this, we approach the election. There's a very serious possibility that the election results will be contested. And that would provide an opportunity for a third individual, as yet unidentified, to come in and say, I will restore order. It's like that quote that you see on bumper stickers all the time about those who will give up a little bit of liberty to gain a little security will deserve neither and lose both. People are begging for their political enemies to take their rights away. Think about the liberals who want Donald Trump to disarm them. I mean, how can you get any more politically masochistic than that?
Yeah. So there's a lot of communistic ideals that seem to be pushed by a lot of the rioters and the protesters. I personally am much more scared of fascism because it has already been instated in a lot of ways. We definitely have economic fascism. It's heavily taking place in our government and in other areas too. And people have given fascism different labels. It's conservative and liberal now. Those are two facets of fascism where literally no one around the country is friendly toward Marxism or communism. If you go talk to your average person on the street and ask him about Marxism, he's not going to have any friendly feelings toward it, but he doesn't realize that liberalism and conservatism, or as you properly say, neoliberalism and neoconservatism, is fascism, and it's already quickly growing in our government right in front of our eyes, and most people don't even see it. That is what I am much more terrified of than any Marxist wave going through the country.
Well, for Donald Trump to call Joe Biden Marxist shows that he doesn't understand anything about Marxism. The author I mentioned earlier, Frantz Fanon, the book I'm reading, by the way, is called The Wretched of the Earth. Frantz Fanon was a Marxist, but Marxism has about 1 million different subcategories of academic and philosophical thought. There's even the idea of anti-Marxist Marxism. Plenty of people agree with Marx's critique of capitalism and capital without endorsing his communistic solution. Chris Hedges is an author who feels that way. Probably talk about that another time. But obviously, these people at these protests, they are obviously not especially well versed in political philosophy in general, and Marxism in particular. One of the I was talking earlier about how I went to the Boston protest and then the Manchester, New Hampshire protest. Right before I went to the Manchester protest, I met up with a former coworker of mine who there's nothing going on upstairs for her. Her life was destroyed when she was 17 for some bad decisions she made. I'm not going to get into it right now, but she doesn't know political theory from a can of paint. I asked her one day who Julian Assange is, and she had no clue. She didn't know what WikiLeaks was. She didn't know anything. Yet she was very gung-ho about these Black Lives Matter protests. These protests have been mass marketed and popularized and commodified in a way to try to appeal to the broad population, which is to say the people who have no political education and certainly no political disciplinary theory. or training. And so I wouldn't, if somebody in a crowd, someone who's obviously never read a work of political philosophy, identifies as a Marxist, I wouldn't take that any more seriously than I would like a conservative who supports Trump claiming to say that they're actually a conservative, because obviously they understand nothing about it. They're actually neoconservatives. The political illiteracy of the American people is unfathomably deep.
Right.
And yeah, so I'm not going to use what somebody says at a rally to indicate what the people at the rally think overall. It doesn't mean anything.
Gotcha. So the last thing I wanted to ask you is, what are you planning on doing moving forward? Because I have some of my own ideas, but you see a lot of the same issues that I see, and I think we kind of foresee a lot of the same things playing out in the same way. So I'm wondering, what do you think we should do? I mean, is it just ringing the alarm bell? Is it, gathering canned goods? What is it? Like, what do we do?
I spent about 2 hours on Sunday morning cooking hamburger and then putting it in my freezer because I'm just preparing for the meltdown of American society. And at least I'm going to have tacos while everybody else is starving in the street. But seriously, it depends on what it is you want to do. As a writer, some people call me a philosopher, but I haven't earned that distinction. I am perfectly aware that what I do is not going to make an impact in the present. If it's going to make an impact, it's going to be much further down the line, probably after I'm dead. I don't expect to see solutions in my lifetime. So I've acquired that kind of historical humility. But what people should do, if you're asking what people should do to defend themselves, there's not a whole lot of ammunition left on the shelves. Find a job that has been resilient to the coronavirus. Put some meat in the freezer. Don't get a pet if you don't already have one. These people who got a dog during the pandemic, I'm like, that dog is going to be the first thing to go on the barbecue grill once the economy turns to pot. Try to live as simply as possible. Try to find pleasure in activities that don't require electronic stimulation. Learn how to read books. Don't expect to see your team in the Super Bowl, because I don't know if we're going to have a Super Bowl. And for God's sake, stop believing in political solutions. These well-dressed people in Washington, D.C. are not going to save you, as Frantz Fanon could have explained. They're there largely to appease the colonialists, otherwise known as the oligarchs. It ain't hopeful no more. So abandon all hope, ye who enter here. But that doesn't mean commit suicide. That means, like, try to find something you can do within your limited means. Don't think that the next president is going to solve the problem.
All right. Well, you heard him, guys. I'll put a link in the description to Dack's channel. Definitely go check it out. He's got a lot of good content, got a lot of interesting interviews on there. So thanks for coming on again, man. We'll have you back, definitely.
Absolutely. Thank you.